Yo guys, what is up? And today we are back with another week of Broadway grosses, so let's get into it. Up first, we have and Juliet. Last week it did 95%, this week 92%, going from 1,167,944 to 974K, which is a considerable drop. The average ticket went from 149 to 128. Still making its money, still not in any threat, but we did notice this trend in the fall, and this likely means that and Juliet will face a couple of weaker weeks in the months ahead, but there's nothing to fear yet. A Beautiful Noise went from 58% to 55%, and 746K to 694K, which is a pretty bad drop. Well, not a bad drop. It's not the hugest drop, but the past 3 weeks have been filled with 6s and 7s, and so far 2024 has not been kind to A Beautiful Noise. And again, I think this can close this year, but it keeps on surprising us. Like, just when you think it's out, it comes back in. So Back to the Future did 96% last week and 85% this week, going from 1,218,000 to 974K. And I think this would make it its lowest week ever. And what a drop. I mean, that's a pretty substantial knock. Now, again, this is still going to go on for many more years. It's just a small blimp. But it is very surprising that Back to the Future would fall this much. Obviously, these bigger musicals, you're expecting it to fall. But again, you don't expect it to go past $1 million and into the $900,000 range. And I wonder if the snowstorm from last week is maybe why some of these did worse than normal. Days of Wine and Roses did 65% this week compared to last week's 81%, and 417K compared to last week's 490K, and the average ticket did go up to $80. It's always going to be a tough sell. It's a musical about alcoholism. It's not a very mainstream product, and if we're being honest, this musical has not had good marketing, but even if it had the most amazing marketing, there are some musicals in which the content is not going to be mainstream, and it's not going to get to those numbers that it needs to sustain itself on Broadway. Here Lies Love, a perfect example. Now, luckily, this is a limited engagement, so it doesn't exactly matter how bad or good it does, and for a prestige musical, business-wise, it's doing what they probably expected it to do. Gutenberg did 98% last week to this week's 98.25, going from 1,208,735 to 1,163,354, which is not at all a bad drop, and that is ending, I think, next weekend. Hadestown went from 100% to 95%. And 831K to 695K, an over 100K plus drop. And for a minute there, I thought Hadestown might be saved. But again, this is a huge drop, even with Jordan Fisher. So I'm not entirely confident that's going to make it to the end of this year. But again, I said it was going to close in January of 2024, and that didn't end up happening. Just feel like the past few years, it's been going out of steam. And one of these days, it's just going to have a couple of months where it just does so poorly that it's going to close. So if you're a Hadestown fan, like I always say, brace yourselves, because you never know, and the numbers are not amazing. Harmony, which is closing, did 79% compared to last week's 76%, and 540K compared to last week's 534K. Hadad Danon, Ohio, which is closing, and we were predicting this for a while, did 63% last week and 63% the week before, going from 387K to 383K, so not much of a difference. I listened to the album, and personally, I felt like it was the most generic thing I've ever listened to, and it was not great. But I feel bad that they're closing. You could say they didn't build momentum. Sorry, I had to make the joke. I didn't have to. Kimberly Akimbo did 91% last week and 82% this week, going from 571K to 487K, and that again is closing. Mulan Rouge, the musical, did 99% last week and 93% this week, going from 1,171,431 to 1,076,750, which is not great for Mulan Rouge, because you want to see those numbers not go past the 1,100,000 and whatever range. But again, it's not going to close anytime soon. It's perfectly fine. If it goes into the 9s and the 8s, that's when we start to get concerned. 6 did 96% last week compared to this week's 98%. And $1 million last week to 880K this week, which is a pretty significant drop. Spamalot did 87% last week and 70% this week, going from 1,053,066 to 832K, which is a big drop, but considering how Spamalot isn't the most expensive musical, and it's actually doing way better than so many musicals. Even though the capacity was quite low, the overall gross was pretty spectacular. Sweeney Tod, the Demon Barber of Fleet Street, without Anna Lee and Josh Groban, did 795K compared to last week's 2 million and 90% capacity. So while the capacity was pretty strong, the overall gross was pretty weak. And if you go to Broadway Journal, which is like a site which tells you exclusive inside details, Sweeney needs to be making around 840K a week. That's its operating cost, so it's actually doing under its operating costs. But again, it's going to boost with Sutton, Foster, and Aaron Tveit, though I do think that it's still selling quite poorly, even when they do come on, so I do predict this will close. And those are the grosses for this week. Let me know what you think and what you think about Hadad Danon in Ohio closing. And is the original musical dying on Broadway? Personally, I don't think it's ever dying, but I definitely do think it's in very dire straits this season in particular. Like, subscribe, and comment, and I will see you in the next video. Peace.